So we watched the iPlayer documentary about Tim Westwood's sex crimes, the BBC documentary about Tim Westwood's sex crimes. And it was really weird. The stuff he did was really disgusting, and bizarre, really quite bizarre. And yeah, it was called Hip Hop's Open Secret, Tim Westwood, Hip Hop's Open Secret, which was really weird because it was made by the BBC. He worked for the BBC, and they're calling it an open secret in their own documentary. And there's even a bit in this documentary where they reach out to the BBC for comment, and they effectively give a no comment. And then it turned out that there were loads of allegations made against him that the BBC were aware of years ago. So the whole thing is bizarre. It's like the BBC snitching on themselves for doing nothing about his sex crimes. It's just bizarre. Really, really bizarre. But yeah, the allegations are horrible. And they're totally credible as well. I mean, the first person in the documentary, I don't know why they put her first, to be honest. All I will say is her allegation is very different to the other ones in the documentary. She comes off very differently to the other people, and her story, it feels very different, to be honest. And I was just reading now, whilst researching this, a Guardian article where they talked about the allegations as well, and they had other new ones. And some of those were a bit like hers. They were kind of you're sort of what exactly is the allegation? There's not really an allegation being made. You're just describing an unpleasant sexual encounter with Tim Westwood, which I'd imagine is most sexual encounters with Tim Westwood. But yeah, anyway, the majority of them in this documentary were totally credible, and you see the people had no reason to lie, and they didn't seem like they were. And the stories were horrible and gross. It was really weird. And the crazy thing is, what gets forgotten in all of this, even before this, is Tim Westwood is 64 years old. I mean, he's almost the same age as my parents. And A, that makes his sex crimes even worse. And B, just everything about him is so ridiculous. He's just an absurd human being. I used to always say before this that it was like Tim Westwood and Chris Eubank kind of swapped. It was like a Freaky Friday thing going on, I wouldn't dare disrespect Chris Eubank like that now, but I always thought it'd be a good film, where they try and swap back or something. Tim Westwood and Chris Eubank have to team up in some kind of Rush Hour style kind of buddy situation, but that's not going to happen now. So I can set that idea free into the ether. It'll just have to exist in our imaginations, in our hearts and minds. But yeah, he's just so bizarre. I mean, he really is. It's really bizarre that he was the gatekeeper of UK hip hop for so many years, so no one could really make fun of him. No one ever made fun of him, really, apart from people who weren't in hip hop. But otherwise, yeah, you couldn't really. It was always bizarre to me as a kid, seeing these American rappers hanging out with him. And I think to the American rappers, they were just oh, I guess this is just what British people are like. He's just British. And it's no, that's not. That doesn't explain Tim Westwood at all, because we're British and he doesn't make any sense, But he is so weird. For those that don't know, his dad was a vicar. He grew up in a small, posh countryside town. Where did he grow up? And yeah, he's 64, so he grew up a long. He was born in the 1950s. He was born in 1957, yeah, and he in Peterborough, yeah, Lowescroft, yeah, His dad was a priest, and anyway, yeah, and then he became Tim Westwood, you know, whatever Tim Westwood is. He's, I know I keep stressing it, but really quite odd. He always seemed harmless, though, you know. I found him very likeable. I enjoyed him because I like weird characters, and it's enjoyable to see someone like that on the radio. Like, I find him, Charlie Sloth obviously has some kind of like comedic value as well, but not in the same way. And both of them also do have a genuine passion for hip hop, you know, which also adds to the quality of them as presenters. But Tim Westwood was like genuinely eccentric, you know, in a way that like very few people are. Like, for example, in the way that Chris Eubank is, you know. Chris Eubank, I think, is more eccentric. But yeah. His interviews he used to do with rappers on his YouTube channel were like incredible because they're just so weird. There's one where Lil Wayne is about to go to prison, and it's like his last day before prison or something, or one of his last days, you know. And he seems a bit weirded out by Tim's energy towards him, the way Tim is interviewing him. Tim is being like sort of oddly sweet towards him in this slightly strange way. It's just a bit awkward. And he's sort of, it's like moments like that you see that he's like a very old man, you know, like he's sort of being like, and like he's like a kind of sappy old man, you know, and like, but he has this weird like, this kind of like hip hop like facade or like persona that everything is filtered through. And it's really weird. If you watch, for example, the UK version of Pimp My Ride that he was the host of, one of the best shows ever, and to be honest, for me, it's not going to be tainted at all by his sex crime allegations. It may even add a whole nother dimension of humour to the show, but because it's that bizarre and terrible and bad, the show, it's just, I mean, it is literally an absolute monstrosity, and to be fair, what he's done only makes it more of a monstrosity in retrospect. It's a terrible program. They destroy people's cars. Like they just do the worst things to these cars, like stuff you could never ever want in your car unless you were clinically insane. Like there's one guy, he's like Irish guy, he's a farmer, and they put a hot tub in the back of his truck. It's attached to like the bed of the truck, a hot tub. Like, I don't think I need to insult your intelligence by going through the various practical issues of having a hot tub on the bed of your truck. It's insane. It's completely insane. It's one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen on TV. And the whole show was like that, basically. They would like just wreck people's cars. They would make them look grotesque as well, like the paint jobs and stuff. Terrible. It's a very funny show to watch. And you could hear on that, he slips in and out of this weird like fake kind of like hip hop speak, and then his real accent, you know? And they're not that far away, because he kind of always maintains his real accent underneath the hip hop thing. He has a strange way of doing it. Almost more of an old school approach to like blending in that way. Like, I'll just use the words and kind of the intonation and but not everything. I won't actually kind of like adopt the accent in all of my language, you know. I won't fully. It's strange, just a truly bizarre individual, really. And just bizarre, it's another BBC radio DJ who they've had allegations of paedophilia against, and they've ignored it, and they made a documentary about it and referred to it as an open secret. It just felt to me like they're almost rubbing it in our faces, really. It's like it's just it's like a fetish for them at this point. It's kind of sick. I couldn't believe it's so weird to see at the end when they reach out to the BBC for comment, and you just what do you say to something like that? You know, it's a taxpayer funded service. It's a disgrace, basically, like a complete disgrace. The BBC, a lot of good stuff on there. Don't get me wrong, but it's a disgrace. And the fact that they harass people, the only reason that you get harassed for a TV license is for the BBC. It's not for anything else. They should just call it the BBC license. You know, it's the only reason we have this system, and they use that money, you know, like to pay people like this, and they get complaints about them, and they don't say anything, and then they use more of our money to make documentaries where they refer to it as hip-hop's open secret, and then they reach out to themselves for comment, and then they give no comment on our dime, you know? Just a bit weird. More than a bit weird. Really, I mean, quite weird. Yeah, but anyway, yeah, that was that. It was disturbing, yeah. For anyone who doesn't want to watch it, it's not the most fun thing to watch. It's quite short, to be fair. I tried watching something like the R. Kelly ones and stuff. You get 10 minutes in and you're like, man, am I just going to watch like 3 hours of this? It's just depressing. The Tim Westwood one is short. Basically, he was like, it's a lot of, he's like groping girls, and like, it seemed like he would try to sort of like romance like 14-year-old girls and stuff, and then when that didn't work, or if that didn't work, he would just become like sort of sexually aggressive. Really disgusting. And yeah, I guess now there's a bunch of other allegations about him as well that relate to adult women, but I don't really know about those. Yeah, pretty mad that they've done it again, or that they keep doing it, the BBC, effectively, because this information didn't come out like right after the Savile thing. Like, they weren't like, okay, Savile happened and we're really sorry, now we're gonna come clean about all this other stuff, you know, like, it's a lot of other stuff that's been going on, and we're gonna come clean about that as way of, you can't apologize for the Savile thing and then just keep doing it. It renders your apology completely meaningless, and it's just, yeah, it's crazy. Incidentally, I almost worked on a show. I did an internship at the BBC, and I almost worked. It was right around the time Savile died, in that brief period where he had died, but his sex crimes hadn't yet become public, and it was sorry, I'm a bit stoned. It was during that period, and he had just died, and they wanted to do a tribute show. Sorry, with Shane Ritchie was hosting it, and it was going to be like a tribute to Savile just after he died. And I was supposed to be working on it. I was supposed to be on set. I didn't have a good time interning at the BBC at all. Left it on a very bad note. It was weird. This was obviously, I mean, it was when Savile died. It was a long time ago. Yeah, I think I was a bit of an arsehole about it, but to be honest, it wasn't great anyway. The people there weren't really great. But yeah. And I was meant to be working on it, and then I had this weird incident with this girl. I had this long-term infatuation with this girl for like a really long time, like secretly, you know, and I was going to tell her, and I wanted to like see her this one weekend. We lived quite far away from each other, and I was like I'd been really trying to like, you know, convince her to hang out, and I was going to tell her, and then she cancelled, and she'd already cancelled before, and then she cancelled again. And in a sense, it was like, that is kind of, you know, she kind of gets what's going on, and she's sort of saying, no, you know, I certainly took it as that, as like a rejection. So then I was just like, all right, well, you know, since we're not hanging out, I'll just tell you, you know. And I told her, and it went very badly. And I, being the person I was back then, I took it terribly, like so embarrassing. I mean, just terrible. I mean, it really was like, you know, I took it I acted like it was, you know, just like a knife through my heart, you know, like I was so wounded, and like, and it was so like, it was just so dramatic. It was like, it was just crazy. Like, I don't know, I was a ridiculous human being back then. I was really emo about it, and just, yeah, anyway. So I didn't go into work that weekend. I didn't do the last 2 days of the internship, where I would have been working on this Savile show, and then very shortly after that, all the Savile stuff came out. Unreal. Unreal, the Savile stuff. I mean, Jesus, like, not very well known fact is that Jimmy Savile was born on Halloween as well. That's really something, you know. You look at pictures of the guy, you read about what he did, you think about the fact that he was born on Halloween. It's just too much. It's too much. There's a lot of famous pedos out there. There's a lot of American pedos, you know, high profile ones. With nothing I've ever heard of has ever come close to Savile. Savile is literally the last boss of pedos. He's just like, I mean, yeah, he was bizarre. He was just pure evil, basically like evil incarnate, you know, like pure bottomless evil, like a literal black hole of a human being. Because the thing is with Savile, the through line between all the things that he did was just evil. Like, that was what he liked. I'm convinced he just enjoyed the evilness of it, and that was the thrill. Was that, you know. You could refer to it as power, I guess, but not all power that you exert is equally evil. But the things he did all were, like, as in, there's relative evil. Do you know what I mean? And yeah, I don't know. Yeah, crazy. And you kind of just, I think it's one of those events where you just lose all faith in the establishment. Like, I think even if people don't realise that they did, I think even normal people just lost faith in the establishment completely. Taxpayer-funded broadcaster, all of them knew about this for years. Everyone there, like everyone, and yeah, like, I would imagine the show that I was meant to be working on, probably everyone who worked on that knew about it. All the senior employees, obviously I was a fucking stoned 19-year-old intern, I didn't know anything, but probably like everyone who was working on that knew about it, or had heard, you know, rumours about it, because that's pretty much the vibe, is that like it was synonymous with his name in the industry. So they all fucking knew about it. The police, how many reports did they have? It's like a ridiculous amount. And that is true to form with them, seemingly, whenever it comes to high profile cases of this nature. They're like, oh, that sounds like way too much. You know, that's, you know, they just leave it, basically. They're like, right, what did you do? Okay. Poor. Yeah, sounds bad. And then they just file it away under don't give a shit. And And the problem is you see that level of inconsiderateness in daily life in people anyway. You know, the amount of things you see where you see people do things and you just think, wow, you just straight up don't care, really. You just don't care, you know, how it affects people and what you're doing. And it's so common. And so you see that at the BBC, you see it in the police, and because there are so many other similar, not just involving celebrities in the industry and BBC and stuff like that. There's been loads of similar stuff involving children, whether it's with politics or it's in like poor areas on a wide scale, or it's like or the church or whatever, where they won't go near it or do anything, and so often basically people just stand by and passively allow terrible things to happen effectively on their watch. And it's very hard to have faith in any institutions anymore, really. Who can you trust, you know? There are a few groups I can think of people who still maintain a kind of honourable image. But if they're not covering up stuff like that, most of these institutions, they're corrupt in some way anyway. So, I mean, you can't even trust football, you know, for example. Like, FIFA is completely corrupt. And that's football. That's like the organisation that manages football. And that's almost like a relatively innocuous example compared to others. It's crazy. So I don't know where we go from here, really, as a society. Because I think everyone, even if they lie to themselves, they've seen all the fucking smoke and mirrors, and just have a complete lack of trust in the world around them. Yeah, I don't know. That's why I think personally it's very dangerous to pigeonhole, for example, conspiracy theories in a certain way. It's really stupid to me that that's used as a blanket term. First of all, it frequently refers to things that are not conspiracy theories, they're just alternative theories. But that's not really important. The main thing, secondly, is that they're somehow bizarrely pigeonholed as having a specific political leaning, like, or a political tendency, and they don't. How can they? Like, they don't have one at all. And it seems very convenient for the powers that be and the organisations who control, by and large, what we think and do and what type of shit we read and look at. It seems very convenient for people who have that level of power in any capacity, governmental, business, financial, whatever, to propagate the idea that conspiracy theories are inherently bad. There was a conspiracy. These things are all examples of conspiracies of silence, like the BBC, the police, stuff like that. They are conspiracies. Like, they conspired to do nothing effectively. It is a conspiracy, because in criminal proceedings normally, like, if you knew that someone was going to murder someone and you didn't do anything about it, you were effectively an accomplice to that murder. So why, like, you know, how can we not at least apply the same logic, morally speaking, and say that receiving all of that information and doing nothing is a conspiracy. Like you're conspiring to do nothing. You have to kind of actively do nothing, because doing nothing is such an act in and of itself. And there's a million examples of more straightforward conspiracies that are completely real and have been proven to be completely real. And why wouldn't there be conspiracies? Like, why would there not be? You know, how can we refer to that term in as a negative thing? It's just crazy. Like, oh, that's a conspiracy theory, right? What's wrong with that? Why is that bad? Why is it bad that something is a conspiracy theory? It's crazy. It's completely crazy. It's like, it's just, you know, denouncing something that cannot really be good or bad. It's just one potential way of looking at a million different things. And yeah, there are so many that have proven to be true. And the worst part is a lot of them you can't even talk about. Is certain things, certain conspiracy theories, you know, that have a huge amount of weight behind them, like legitimate evidence that holds up to scrutiny, and you're not allowed to talk about them on platforms like this. It's dangerous territory, really, really dangerous territory. Like, for people to tell us for there to be some kind of governing body of information that also has financial interests, like financial vested interests, and is can operate both within that sort of financial sphere and as like lawmakers and stuff, and especially when you get the horrible kind of merging of the two, where a company becomes so ubiquitous that like they are basically part of life. Like Facebook, for example, how is that any different to the phone service? Like, how is Twitter any different to just SMS messaging in general? I know there are differences, but what I mean is like this isn't a really specific platform. This is a mode of communication. It's a mode of communication. Like, and Facebook is a mode of communication. How can they tell us what is or isn't true? That is just so dangerous, and it's sad and frustrating that people don't see this, because they see things that they don't like being shut down, and they're like, oh great, good, yeah, I'm glad that guy deserved to be silenced. I didn't like that person. It was about time. And it's like, who's doing it? Look who's doing it. Do you think they're functioning on like love for you, on genuine concern for your well-being? No, they're not. And I'm not going to quote that poem, you know, first they came for blah, 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 but it's the truth. It really is true. Like, that is where that concept comes from. And everyone read that poem when they were at school and was like, yeah, this is true. And then it's happening now, and they're oblivious. They're oblivious to the fact that they're like living out this poem. And the thing is that it's not that hard to point this out to people. Like, there are some oppressive ideologies going around now that like it's hard to communicate with, you know. But this, it doesn't take long for people to realize, like, oh yeah, I'm kind of being lied to about all of this, and I'm kind of tolerating these people telling me what to think and say, purely because I'm getting a little kind of like treat in the form of people I don't like are being silenced. And people start to debate whether or not it's fair, like in individual cases. Like, you'll see it. It's people who claim to they claim to be against it, or they claim to want free speech for themselves, but then this happens to someone gets completely shut down, and they're like, oh yeah, well he did say this, and he did say, and it's like, why are you even getting into that? Why are you even getting into what he did? If it's not literally, explicitly, like, if it's not something that is considered a crime worldwide, then it's not something that a global like communications platform needs to concern itself with. Why should it? Like, pretty much every country around the world, it's illegal to threaten somebody's life, right? To say, I am going to do X to you. I think everyone would agree it's fine that you're not allowed to do that on the internet. Nobody has any qualms about that. And if they do, well, where do they live where you're allowed to do this anyway? You're not. It's a crime, and it's a crime for a reason. It's a crime everywhere for a reason. It's fundamentally important to our safety and well-being and our rights, basically. Other stuff that's not, well, it's like, why it's so murky and dangerous to start letting companies like Facebook meddle in this. It's sad. It's really sad. Yeah. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if there's any positive outcome on the way in terms of all of this. The ball seems to be rolling a bit now, and as well as, I mean, free speech is another term that has become sort of synonymous with like bad people, and it's laughed at. It's like, oh yeah, they're trying to defend their free speech, and they're like, free speech, which to them means spreading lies or something. It's like, yeah, that is the point of free speech, because no one has the right really to say what is or isn't a lie. It's just it's like when you enter an argument with someone about something, like, or a debate even, you say something, you know you're right, like you feel 100% certain that you're right, but you can't argue with them on that basis, because it's wrong. Like, you know that you're right, you feel 100% certain about this issue or this thing or this fact or whatever. You don't just, that's not how you don't go, I'm 100% certain, you're wrong, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm right. It doesn't, you can't approach a human being like that. It's wrong. It doesn't matter how convinced you are of the fact that you're right, you don't converse like that, because it's impractical, it's wrong, it's a standard that will inevitably be abused. Like, if you're allowed to do that, then they're going to do that, and they might actually be wrong. You know, we all know this. We know it. It's common sense. It's how we engage with one another, and we just have developed that because it is common sense. It's like, we're not going to get very far with this. We're not going to get very far if there is some attempt at making some kind of like ordained truth that we all have to kind of respect and abide by. There's ways of figuring things out for ourselves, whilst kind of externalizing them with other people, and allowing the possibility for people with individuality and agency in their minds, as we all should have, to figure things out for themselves. And that's essential. It's an essential part of freedom, and it's an essential part of freedom of your mind. The most private and sacred thing you have is your mind. And when you speak, you're not just speaking, you're thinking as well. It's like how you think, and it's how you think outwardly, and in in connection with other people, in sync with other people. So, or not in sync, in disagreement or whatever. But it's like it's part of your process. So yeah, it's terrible. I try not to be dramatic about it because it's bothered me for years, and I try not to get too kind of like, oh, it's tragic, it's terrible, it's so scary, you know, all these authoritarian kind of concepts creeping into our lives and whatever. You can go down that rabbit hole very easily and very convincingly, you know, like complete doom and gloom. And I try to think like most people, the reality is most people in civilized history have not had like that much freedom in like many ways, you know. In many ways people have, you know, and for years and years people have been ideologically oppressed in terrible ways. There's a very broad spectrum, you know, like so many people throughout history have been oppressed like enormously in that way, like more than what most of us are experiencing now. Or whether or not you do feel you're experiencing it, maybe you don't think it's a problem, maybe you don't see it as a problem, but most it's happened a lot basically. And you know, it's like under a complete like dictatorial regime it's much worse, obviously. And I mean, in like somewhere like North Korea, it's crazy. You know, that is way down the other end of the spectrum. So that helps to put it into perspective, to say there's basically always been some level of oppression in this regard, and we're quite low on the scale right now. But yeah, there is always that feeling of like, how far can this go? Because on the one hand, technology allows us more freedom, more privacy, more power as individuals, the ability to be more a part of the ebb and flow of information. But does it really? Because in places like China, for example, mobile technology is used to keep tabs on everybody and to see what they're saying. And when everything you say is digitized, you know, it can be easier for people to control what you say and what you think and what you're allowed to look at. And I guess ultimately it's just a power. Technology is just a form of power, and maybe we have that power, maybe the government has it, or big businesses and, you know, people with their own weird vested interest in certain things. And it's just a question of how that is distributed at any given time. It can be wielded for authoritarian purposes, or it can, in some instances, be beneficial to us as people. But I kind of feel that a healthy way to look at the world is like we're always against the government. Like we're always in opposition of them, in a sense. We kind of have to be. We basically have to be, because they have so much power over us. We have to be like suspicious of them all the time, and they have to be understanding of that. That should be, I think, part of the role, is to understand and accept that people will fear you and be suspicious of you and scrutinize you and not trust you, and you have to do everything in your power to try and mitigate that. And it's not easy to do that, and there's not necessarily a perfect way of doing it. And that should just be accepted more as our relationship to the government. But they can kind of like put the metaphorical arm around our shoulder quite easily, and they've been doing that in recent years, I think. Sort of like it's kind of abusive relationship, you know, like no, we're looking out for you, no, oh, don't go over there, watch out for them or whatever. And it's like they're kind of, people are swallowing the idea more, it seems. Maybe not. I don't really speak to a lot of people, to be honest, but it seems that way. Like it seems like people are kind of embracing the kind of like sickly warm hug of the government and the powers that be, and being like, you know, they look out for me, they want what's best for me, thanks very much, you know, like kind of like sort of smugly kind of cozying up under the government's wing, under the wing of the government. I don't know. And big organizations, I feel people don't have the requisite level of like skepticism, because again, like if even stuff like FIFA is corrupt, I don't know, I keep saying even stuff like FIFA, I don't know why it has more significance to me than FIFA is corrupt. I guess it's because this isn't like a one specific football organisation, this is the football organisation. I guess that means there's more money changing hands and more of a likelihood of corruption, whatever. It's probably not, but it just strikes me as terrible. It's like the people's game is globally beloved, and it's one of those things, football, that like anyone can just enjoy it and take part in it, and everyone is welcome. I know some people would have arguments against that. I completely disagree though, really. I think by and large, like, everyone is welcome, and that's the point of football. It's like, even if you don't have a team that your family support, you choose a team yourself if you want. A lot of people do as adults, you know, they just randomly decide to get into it, and you're just part of the world of football. Even if you just watch on TV, you're somehow like an important part of it, and it belongs to you and you belong to it, and it really is beautiful. Like, and it's the people's game for that reason. It's the most, like, in some sense, it's like the most like egalitarian thing. It's just and for that to be at that level, like, so corrupt, the World Cup, you know, it's just a joke. It's a terrible, sick joke, really, and like, I'd feel we don't react to it enough. I feel we kind of ignore it. We're like, oh look, FIFA's completely corrupt, and people are taking payments under the table to completely alter the landscape of world football, and we're kind of just like, yeah. And I'm not saying there's much else we can do, but it just, I guess what I mean is we kind of like take it on the chin quite well. But I don't know, maybe we have to live our lives, we have to just bury all of this stuff, in a sense, in terms of, we don't bury it as a news story. We all talk about it. Everyone knows FIFA is corrupt. But we bury it in terms of contemplating what that actually means to us as individuals, and what it says about the rest of the world around us, potentially. Because I think that reality is too painful to accept. And sometimes when I grapple with it, I find it frightening, really. Like, I find it overwhelming. Sometimes if I'm tripping, it comes up quite a lot, this feeling of like, just the powers that be all around you, and they control so much of what you do and what happens to you and what you see and everything around you, and so many of them are so evil, and a lot of the ones who aren't are just kind of complicit in that, because they're kind of uncaring, even if they're not like actively terrible humans. And then a lot of people are just stupid, and also a lot of organizations develop a life of their own and become bad actors, like become like agents of bad things, kind of through no individual's fault, and just surrounds us all the time. And it's weird. It's a weird feeling. I've spoken to people from China, and it's strange. The feeling they have towards it is often not as strong as you might think. It's just like, yeah, that's happening in my life. That's what it's like. Yep. you know, they don't like it. They're aware of it. Not everyone, but a lot of people, especially now. It's gotten really out of hand there now. In terms of the COVID passports, it's gotten crazy. It's just gotten absolutely crazy. It's gotten to the point of just complete harassment of their own people. It's just like, and people who previously swallowed a lot of bullshit from the regime are now like, no way, this is crazy. This is just too much, you know, like, we can't live our lives. It's people trying to pick up their kids from school, and it's like, sorry, you forgot to do your fucking, you know, tri-weekly COVID test or whatever. It's just absolutely bananas. I can't understand the motivation for it either. I have no idea why, apart from maybe that they just enjoy it now. It's just what they do, you know. And I worry that a lot of us are headed for the same kind of dull acceptance of so much of this stuff, and just seeing it and thinking like, yeah, that's what they do. We can have sometimes a strange way of cowing to authority. Like, I don't know. Yeah. We sort of have I think there's some weird, deep-seated, like, respect people have for it, for that level of power and authority, and that gets covered up and buried, and because it annoys you, you know, police annoy people a lot. A lot of people don't like the police and stuff, but there's something in us that, like, does innately sort of respect power and authority, or fear it or whatever. I don't know, but yeah, I think we forget that they're just a group of people trying to do things their way, and most of us don't want to do it that way, or we might have other ways of, you know, and we see them as something more than ourselves, when really they're not really more than ourselves. They are just, that's just what's happening right now. And I hope it's possible for ideas to overrule, if this is some kind of innate, you know, like, kind of feeling we have. I hope that ideas and thoughts are enough to overcome that. But I don't know. I guess it seems like it's a sort of eternal struggle in a way, even though it isn't. But it feels like it, at least as long as civilization has been around, you know. Fuck knows. Yeah, anyway, cool.